Week 13 reaction in the NFL. I'm going to break down a few games this week as always. KC Dallas, Bills Steelers, Panthers Rams. We get into it next on Beyond the Locker Room. Going all the way back to Thursday, because I thought this was a very interesting game and compelling game because we had two teams that were really fighting for their lives or playoff lives in Dallas and Kansas City. I wanted to just go through a few things I saw from that game, which was really fascinating in a lot of ways. Very good game, very entertaining game. Usually Thanksgiving Day games sometimes end up being duds, but this one was not. I would say even the first game was pretty good with Detroit and Green Bay. Pretty entertaining. But I'm going to focus on this one because KC, I haven't talked about Dallas much since I pretty much had written them off, I think, after week 4, I think it was, or 3. And, they're hanging in there. I got to give them credit, man. They've reeled off now 3 in a row. They've beaten the two, I guess, participants in last year's Super Bowl back-to-back weeks. That's pretty impressive. And Dak's probably throwing himself in there for MVP discussion chatter. So let's get into it and see, kind of discuss what I've seen so far with both teams. So let's go start with the winners. The victors go to spoil, as they say. Let's go here with Dallas first. I said before, Dak has been impressive, for most of the year, carrying this team with injuries, CeeDee Lamb being out for a fair amount of it, and he's still kind of kept the ship afloat and kind of put him back in a position where now, they're 6-5-1, they're still breathing, let's put it that way, when it comes to the playoff run and the playoff race. He put up 320 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was cool, composed. Spags brought the blitz on him various times, try to shake him up. I mean, early on, he had the early pick right there. I think on the first possession, it looked like it was going to be another one of those long games with Dak and Spags as it was back in the day, but he found a way to figure out, when the blitzes were coming, when to make the adjustments to them, and he was fantastic. His receiving core now with Lamb and Pickens. Thank you, Steelers, for offering Pickens pretty much for nothing. Lamb and Pickens, combined for over 200 yards. They were fantastic. And everyone's saying, oh, who's the number one? Listen, it doesn't matter in this case here. Some days, CD's going to have it going, and they definitely were trying to get his confidence boosted after having a few drops last week. But Pickens, in this case, has continued to ascend as the year's gone on. It's pretty much a 1A, 1B situation at this point, and it makes them a very difficult team to deal with, with that. And then throw in Turpin, who in this case had maybe the biggest play of the game. He recovered the fumble there on the Chiefs' 8-yard line where they were going in for a score, and that was ending up like disaster. Pickens trying to make a move. McDuffie, punched the ball out from him, and Turpin was right there, Johnny on the spot to get it, which really much gave them the go-ahead field goal, and that sealed the game for Dallas. So, contributions across the board. The defense is hanging on there. It's more of a bend, don't break type of scenario with the defense. I still am questionable about the defense at this point, but Dak and that offense is carrying them at the moment and finding ways to get dubs, and you guys got to respect that, man, when it's all said and done. On the other side of the ball, the Chiefs, I mentioned a few weeks ago, is the dynasty over, and I think right now this might have been a couple more nails in the coffin after Thanksgiving Day dinner with what we saw. The offense has gotten progressively better as the season's gone on. Definitely Rashid Rice being back in the mix has, kind of put some punch into this offense. But when it's all said and done, the key plays they were getting last year, how many close games did the Chiefs win last year like this? And this year, like that punch ball, for example, by McDuffie, last year that had been scooped up by a red jersey. That's not happening this year. Those things are not happening. Mahomes can do as much as he can. He's putting up the ball a ton, but they just aren't getting those key stops, and they're not making those key plays when needed like they were last year. I don't know, as I said before, with the schedule and how it looks, it's still going to be pretty tough for them to get in. But if there's a team that might find a way to get in, it's the Chiefs. But I don't know at this point. It doesn't look promising, let's put it that way, with the rest of the schedule down the stretch. So we'll see. That streak of AFC championship games might get broken pretty soon. But the Chiefs are definitely in some trouble. Game number 2. Well, I mentioned these two teams last week. This was I call this the Survivor Bowl. Pretty much, who is going to get their tiki torch. And Jeff Pro saying, The tribe has spoken, and you're off the island. Well, the tribe spoke, and the folks in this case from the Steel City are going home. They're taking a tiki torch and their bag, and they're off the island. Pittsburgh, in some ways, Buffalo did Pittsburgh a favor. In some ways, to put them out of their misery, because this team, as a Steelers fan, this has been a very hard Steelers team to root for this year, and for numerous ways. Never mind starting with the quarterback, but that's a whole other story. But even if you go with his personality, that's one thing. But even his performance has been like, this dink and dunk type of stuff where it's like, okay, you get the ball out quickly, but there's no explosive plays. Nothing to make you feel like, okay, this team's moving the ball. It started off pretty promising at the beginning of the year, but it seems like everyone scouted them and figured it out now pretty much. So they're just kind of just being very physical with the receivers at the line of scrimmage. We're not really getting much movement in this case here from the running game at times. Rodgers looks, he looks even 10 years older than what he is, actually. I don't know. I've never seen a guy that's playing that doesn't look like he wants to be out there. But, let's go back to Buffalo for a second. Props to Buffalo for getting the W. They took care of business 26-7. It wasn't really eventful at all. The Buffalo defense, I'm not sure what to make of it. You're playing Pittsburgh's offense, so, and having, second half, you had to deal with Mason Rudolph. So, take that for whatever it's worth. But they got the job done. It was a balanced attack on with the running game and the passing game. They kept Allen pretty clean for the most part. The ground game gave up. I think Buffalo's ground game, was 249 yards on the ground. Josh Allen broke a record, I believe, in this case for most touchdown by a quarterback. You couldn't do nothing with him. So, the Steelers, like I said before, we'll get the Steelers a little bit more in a second, the bigger picture with them. But Buffalo, 8-4 now, they kind of keep attached, keep tethered to New England to give themselves a shot to get the division still. So that was a big win for them. And I think they put themselves back in a position where, Bills fans could feel, could exhale a bit. They can exhale. And I think that's where we're at with Buffalo. As for the Steelers, oh man, it's a hot mess. This is the type of team that should have never should have never existed in the first place. I said it a week ago. They should have drafted a first round pick. With the first round pick, they should have drafted a quarterback. At least there would be some hope as a Steeler fan. Now you're looking around here. We're a big mediocre team right now at 500. I guess technically we're still in the division title chase. I think this is just only a matter of time that Baltimore puts us over our misery. But we're still in the race somehow. However, you look at this team, the defense is atrocious. It's gotten old right before our eyes. The offense in this case is saying nothing. No one really gets a lot of explosive plays besides DK Metcalf, and now everyone's pretty much double teaming him and daring anyone else to beat us. Rodgers, as I said before, had no business being on this team in the first place. This honestly, and I say this as a Steelers fan, honestly, I can't wait for the season to end, because you can just see it coming to an end. Like, even if they were somehow miraculously to get in the playoffs, like what are we thinking, guys? Like, really, do we really think this team's going anywhere? Come on, and it's sad in this case because I love me some Mike Tomlin, but for the fans to kind of start getting on him in the crowd and chants of him getting fired like that, it shouldn't have come to this, And God bless, I love the Roonies. I love what they're about, love what they stand for, but they should have known, everyone should have moved on, and it would have been nothing wrong with it. Mike Tomlin's a fantastic coach. He should have moved on. The Roonies should have realized we should have moved on. They should never, Aaron Rodgers should have never come here in the first place. Like, all this should never happen. At some point, you just got to take your medicine, take your Buckleys, and take the year if it takes that, a year or two, and just rebuild properly. And this is with the frustration I have right now with the Steelers. But I got a few more weeks of it till it finally ends. But yeah, definitely I think at this point, Steelers are pretty much got the tiki torch, so they're off the island at this point. Maybe they swim back to shore. I doubt it. But we'll see in the next few weeks. But it doesn't look good. Game number 3. Haven't discussed this team. I made a slight mention of them in my locker room takes, actually, maybe a few weeks ago, I think. I think when they play Atlanta. But Carolina gets a big win against the Rams, man. 31-28. They're huge win for them. They're, I said before, they're frisky. And Bryce Young, for a guy who I think after year 1, couldn't have a more disastrous rookie season. for a quarterback. To see where he is now, I mean, I'm not saying he's like going to be like, he's an all-time great or not like that, but to see the progression of his game and the faith now that his coaching staff have in him. They scored 2 touchdowns on 4th downs. Like, come on, man. Like, so, he's showing that type of leadership in the pocket and the leadership amongst the guys. They've had, both these games, going back to the Falcons game and this one, tight games where they're trailing at some point, like, he was going toe to toe with Stafford, and he didn't upset. He didn't turn over the ball. Unlike Stafford, we'll get them in a second. But the Carolina team, I think right now they're young, they're frisky. I find them kind of fun to watch. As I said before, I always like seeing young players grow and develop, and Bryce Young is doing that before our eyes. No one's whispering about how short or small he is now. He's making the right plays. He just he's got a good feel around the pocket, know when to take off. He's keeping himself fairly healthy and not taking those big hits like he used to in his first year. So I like what I see from Carolina, man. As I said before, they're a fun team to watch, and that AFC South it still feels like Tampa's the lose, really. But you never know. You never know. I mean, like, Tampa's had some injuries. Baker's been dinged up. You never know. So we'll see what Carolina does late in the season. But it's good fun to get fresh blood, in the playoff mix a little bit. They're hanging around. They're not quite there yet, but they're hanging around, and kind of like Dallas, they're just waiting for someone to slip up, and they're right there. So we'll see from their perspective where things go from here. As for the Rams, they took a stroll out here thinking they had the number 1 seed locked up pretty much, maybe, and then got slapped across the face like, whoa, that's a wake up call. Welcome to the NFL. You never know what's going to happen. This team, Rams have a way sometimes of being a little sloppy with the ball, and Stafford there fumbling it, picks. I mean, it was a bit of everything with the Rams. The other thing too is, I don't know, I have to look into this, but they had trouble containing, a mobile quarterback like Young. They had trouble containing him. The defense, was undisciplined, trying to keep him in front of them, and something to watch for, moving forward. Something to watch for, when they play teams. They've always had trouble with the Eagles, and they have a mobile quarterback. Things to watch. They have some teams that they play in the playoffs. Baker can move a little bit. They have that. You have to watch with the Rams. Like, if they can keep those guys in front of them. Same thing with Green Bay. They have the quarterback can move and can run. So they have to be wary when they have that when it comes to this type of matchups. They could be if they get the wrong matchup with how this defense is playing against mobile quarterbacks, it could be a bit problematic for them moving forward. So that's something to watch for them. I think at the moment right now, the Bears might have the number 1 seed. Who knew that? And let me tell you something. If you're LA, you do not want to be having a playoff game going to Soldier Field. That is not what you want, boy. So this is a year where the number 1 seed means a lot, because number 1 seed, you could be going to sunny California to play under friendly confines, as they say, or you potentially could be going to either Green Bay, Philadelphia, or Chicago. Tell me about how that can make a difference, boy. This loss could make such a huge difference in how we see the playoff picture in the NFC. So lots to look forward to. The NFC has been a lot of fun to watch all year, and as I said before, that NFC North is a fascinating division. But stay tuned, stay here to hear more about my analysis as the weeks go on, as we get closer to the playoffs. Locker room takes this week. Not much to say really, besides, I think. I just say, going to Detroit, I've been kind of on them a lot all year. That loss at home, I don't know, man. Lions fans, I think you two might be off the island at this point. It doesn't look great for Detroit. They're hanging on right now. I think they might have the 7th seed at the moment. Don't quote me on it, but they are hanging on. Let's put it that way. As far as that goes, the Seahawks, but Seahawks are rolling, boy. Let me tell you something, folks. The team out there in the Northwest, they ain't paying attention to them. Watch out, people. Watch out. Who knows? They might end up with the 1 seed when it's all said and done. Who knows? Heading to the Northwest for that 12th man. They don't want no part of that, people. They want no part of that. Anyways, those are my takes for this week, man. It's been, as I said before, man, it's always fun when we start getting to the Thanksgiving because now we're getting to the home stretch, the final sprint for the playoffs, man. So keep it locked right here. As always, you can find me on Basketball Rewind weekly with the fellas, Kenyon and Coach Roach. Check out Coach Roach, by the way. He's got his own pod going now. If you want to find out more how his thoughts about the Blue Jays in the offseason, lots of good stuff there. And hey, man, once again, you can find me on that crazy place called X. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Blue Sky. And of course, right here on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe below, folks. Appreciate the support. Once again, keep safe out there. We'll talk later, folks. Keep it locked. Peace.